Hey guys, this is again not going to be like any of my usual videos, and in this video I'm going to talk about stuff that is going to be very hard for a lot of people to listen to. So trigger warning, if you don't like hearing about tragedies and war crimes, this is not the video for you, skip it. So this is the fourth video that I'm making from the Balkans right now, and in the last couple of videos I've sort of sidestepped talking about the Yugoslav Wars because it's such a complex issue to talk about, but I can't, put it off any further because these events were so important in shaping what the region is today and shaping the experiences of the people who are still alive, who have survived these wars, and people who were even born after the wars, that it's very hard for you as a viewer, I guess, to really understand this region without knowing about these things. I've been reading about everything that happened here in a lot of books for the last couple of years since my first visit to the Balkans. So I'll recommend two books that I really liked on this in the video description. So check them out if you want to get a better understanding of it. One of them is the longer book, which is around 1,000 pages, which is one of the best history books I've ever read. I'd highly recommend reading that to really get an understanding of what led to the situation that led to the crisis in the 90s and all the wars where thousands and thousands of people died. The Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was sort of made as a communist country that had 6 other sort of communist states within it. It was Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia-Hercegovina, where I am right now in Sarajevo, Macedonia, Slovenia, and Montenegro. After World War II, the leader who came into power, Josip Tito, was this communist authoritarian figure who sort of brought all the countries together. He was half Slovenian, half Croatian, and he sort of set up the capital of Yugoslavia in Serbia. During that time, unlike essentially all other communist countries, the economy of Yugoslavia was prospering because it wasn't allied with the Eastern Bloc of Stalin. It was doing things its own way. He was applying sort of more of an open socialism, which was working. The citizens of Yugoslavia were enjoying very high living standards, had a very strong currency, had decent jobs, had a good passport. Life was good until around 1980 when Tito died, and there was really no one else similar to him to replace him at that point. During Tito's reign, he made active efforts to sort of suppress any right-wing nationalist movements within the territories because he realized that such movements could lead to the end of Yugoslavia. But once he died, all of that was back on the table again. Also at the same time, the economy of Yugoslavia really collapsed in the 80s. They racked up an insurmountable debt that they owed to Western countries. There was the oil crisis, which adversely affected them to a great extent. Lots of people became unemployed. The currency devalued very fast. The quality of lives for the people or the citizens of Yugoslavia started getting a lot worse, and the different sort of nations inside Yugoslavia started pointing fingers at each other. And these right-wing nationalist movements started to play a more prominent role in politics. And then around the same time, in the late 80s, is when the Soviet Union started collapsing, and all these other countries that were under the Eastern Bloc, not in Yugoslavia, but everything from basically the Czech Republic to Russia, they started having their own independence movements, which inspired these nationalist factions within Yugoslavia even more. So by the time it was the late 80s, early 90s, it seemed the splitting up of Yugoslavia was inevitable. For most of the other countries, things weren't as complicated as it was for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Serbia had ethnic Croats and some other groups, but it was predominantly ethnic Serbs, so there was no question of who would be running that country. Same for Croatia, same for Slovenia, same for, I guess, Macedonia to an extent. But Bosnia was a very, very complicated state with a lot of history, which had always been a very strong multi-ethnic community. And the 3 biggest players here were the Bosniaks, who were essentially the Muslims that lived in Bosnia, the Croats, who were of Croatian descent, but more importantly, who were Roman Catholics who lived in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the Serbs, who were also of Serbian descent, but were Orthodox Christians that lived in the region. And none of them had a clear majority. In the 1991 census, they found out that 44% of the people were the Bosniak Muslims, which was a plurality but not a majority. More than 32% were Bosnian Serbs, which were people who identify ethnically as Serbs but still live in Bosnia. And then around 17%, if I remember right, were Croats. And it wasn't even as simple as you could split the country into 3 clean regions and separate these groups. Inside regions, let's say, that were predominantly controlled by Bosnian Serbs, there were enclaves or there were cities that were full of, Bosniak Muslims. And inside those cities, there would be neighborhoods that would be filled with Croats. So it was a very complicated question, and people heavily disagreed on who should get to rule the country. The Muslims, who were the plurality, the Bosniaks, they were more in favor for an independent Bosnian country, where I guess they would have the largest stake in what happens. The Serbs and the Croats, on the other hand, wanted to be allied with Serbia and Croatia respectively, and so they did not want that. So around the time the 90s started, there were a lot of tensions brewing, there were small incidents happening, but no one living in Sarajevo and very few people really expected it to go as far as it did. The different groups formed their individual militias. Some isolated incidents of violence led to more and more violence, and before you knew it, there was civil war. There were militias of these ethnic groups going in, wiping out villages, killing people indiscriminately in different neighborhoods around the country just because of their religion and their ethnicity. The ethnic Serbs, for the most part, were backed by people in power in Serbia, so they had a pretty big upper hand in the situation. The Yugoslav Wars were very brutal pretty much everywhere, caused a lot of suffering everywhere. But Bosnia-Hercegovina definitely suffered the worst of it. And Sarajevo as a city probably suffered the worst out of any other place in the Balkans. So when you come to Sarajevo today, you see it surrounded by these picturesque hills that you want to go to the top of to get better views of the city. This is where the Serb militia set up their base and their snipers, and they went on a 3-year and 11-month siege of the city of Sarajevo. This is the longest siege in the history of modern warfare. 1 year longer than the siege of Leningrad. Multiple times longer than the Battle of Stalingrad. Some of the most horrific battles that we talk about in World War II. And the people here who were stuck were mostly Bosniaks, but there was also Serbs, Croats, and Jews and people from other ethnicities stuck in this mess too. The Serb militia also took over some key military checkpoints in the city, even though the city was mostly inhabited by the residents still. One of the major tourist attractions in Sarajevo is this Olympic bobsled up on the hills, and it sort of encapsulates the sharp turn that this country took in the span of a decade. In 1984, Bosnia-Herzegovina hosted the Winter Olympics, and the Olympics, by the way, were a much bigger deal 30 years ago than they are now. Now no one even watches them. Back then it was a big thing. It was a very prestigious thing. And there's this bobsled track that went down the hill that you can go and visit. But for me, the most interesting thing is when you're hiking down past the bobsled, you see these bullet-scarred buildings with walls just blown off completely. I was there 3 years ago, and it's such an interesting juxtaposition there. You see mountains and hills, some of the best things that Mother Nature created, through these blown up walls and the destruction that's caused by irrational human beings. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And it's not just those buildings that are bullet-ridden, blown up. This whole city was destroyed during that siege. So for almost 4 years, the people of the city lived through gunshots all day, all night. Snipers shooting through walls, killing people, trying to kill anyone on the streets. Mortars throwing shells all over the city. There's around 200 spots in the city where you can see the remains of the damage that was done by these shells on the pavement. But honestly, if you just take a walk and look around you, this whole city is still bullet-ridden. There's just these holes that you see all over the walls, which if you don't know the history, you might not appreciate, but those are bullet holes from snipers. Some people have tried to cover it up better than others, and you don't see it in the new buildings, but you cannot not see it when you're here. The rebels also blockaded the whole city to prevent any sort of aid from coming to them. The UN and some other agencies tried, I guess, providing food and ration, but it was not the best help. So there were constantly food shortages, water shortages, shortages of fuel. Going out to get some water to drink was a life-threatening task, and people often died while trying to do that. The days slowly turned into weeks, weeks slowly turned into months, and the conflict kept going longer than anyone ever thought. When winter came, people had to start burning their books and their furniture just to stay warm. On top of that, there was someone you know dying every day. And these tactics that were used by the militia, particularly here, but everywhere in the Balkans during the wars, you know, makes you question the monstrosity that human beings are capable of. There are videos of this. Often when kids would go out to get something, the snipers would shoot the kids, but not fatally. And this was almost done as a bait tactic to bring out the parent or the mother, and then they'd kill them both. It probably looks like I'm sitting in a park right now, you know? But this is actually a cemetery that I'm at. And right behind me is this memorial that was created for the, I think, 1500 or so children that were killed during the siege of Sarajevo. Some of them were toddlers at the time. All of them were probably people I'd be seeing today and having beers at the bar if they're still alive, and not killed in the conflict. Genocide on a massive scale was committed in various places, but particularly at this one spot called Srebrenica, which is not too far from here. People in a refugee camp were lined up, and all the boys and men, or boys who looked over 15 was the standard, were killed by the militia in a manner that's eerily similar to how the Nazis killed people in the concentration camp, or near the concentration camp in Niš 50 years prior to that. So it was history just repeating itself. This time it was a different group of people being targeted. It's hard to get a real number on the number of people that were actually survivors of sexual violence, because it's such an underreported crime, but estimates are that up to 50,000 women were raped, and these were very systematic methods. There were rape camps set up all throughout Bosnia, one notorious one not too far from here, where they were kept as prisoners. And the stories that you read about these places are some of the most disgusting things I've heard in my life. Between April 1992 and February 1996, around 15,000 people died because of this siege. At the same time, around 130,000 people in general were killed during the Yugoslav conflicts. It's hard to find someone who's lived through that time here and doesn't know someone who has died, or doesn't know a lot of people who have been displaced, separated from their families and homes forever because of this conflict. So around 1996, the siege of Sarajevo finally sort of came to an end. The UN could never really take action because Russia had veto power over anything the other members were trying to do, and Russia was a strong ally of Serbia. Finally, NATO intervened way too late in 1996, and the siege came to an end, and it's sort of like a ceasefire peace treaty was signed, and Bosnia-Hercegovina, the country, was created with 3 very different regions in it. Republika Srpska on the east and northern sides, where mostly Bosnian Serbs lived. Sort of the central part where Sarajevo and Mostar is, which is Bosnia-Herzegovina, and on the west, this part where Croats lived. And following that, there was a mass exodus of people who didn't ethnically belong in these new carved-out regions, moving to newer places. That's so evident when you spend any time in the Balkans or talk to people from the Balkans or make friends. You soon start to realize that a lot of them, their families had to move in the 90s from a different country just for the hope of a peaceful life. And this new sort of fractured government that was set up for these three regions in Bosnia-Herzegovina was not really meant to be a functioning full-time government. It was supposed to be more like a temporary agreement for them to sort out something bigger, but that never happened. And this heavily fractured government with three different prime ministers for three different regions, multiple different parliaments, still stays in place. It's not very effective just due to the nature of how it's set up. It's a part of the reason this country and the people have failed to make too much progress in the 25 years since the war ended. Tragically, it seems like the system is probably not going to change, because from what it seems like, the people who are in power, the politicians, are making a lot of good money out of being politicians. And it seems like they don't really have a financial incentive, at least, to make the changes necessary to help this country move forwards. In places where different ethnicities are still living together in proximity, tensions can still run pretty high. Not always, but often. One of my friends from Belgrade, she's actually a Bosnian Serb who grew up near Mostar, and now she's going to school in Belgrade. She told me that she couldn't even use her real name her whole life, her first name, because it's a Serbian name. She had to use sort of a shortened version of that name to not raise suspicion among strangers and to sort of protect herself from potential retaliation from people who are still not over what happened. But you know, things are getting better. There might be a silver lining to this cloud after all. The younger generations are more aware than ever of the potential dangers of this sort of right-wing nationalism and how pointless everything was that led to these atrocities that changed the lives of everyone around them. Just based on my friends that I've made in the Balkans and mostly in Belgrade, I know a lot of people whose parents are very much like people from the 80s and 90s who could not stand people from other ethnicities. But my friends, the kids of these people, are some of the most open-minded, liberal people in the world, and that gives me a lot of hope. The international community maybe acted too late, but has acted more decisively in recent years. And the people who are in charge of committing genocide and these horrifying war crimes, a lot of them have now been convicted and are now in jail and are, I guess, in a sense, paying for what they did. If that brings any closure. This reminds me of this one thing. Like a month ago, one of those war criminals was sentenced to life in prison, and he was one of the people behind Srebrenica. And a friend of mine I was talking to was telling me that he was talking about this with his mother, and his mother said that, like, what would have the mothers of those kids who died in Srebrenica, what would have they done if they could only get life in prison for their kids instead of being slaughtered like animals? But yeah, justice is being served. Maybe not fast enough, maybe not enough, but progress is being made. Both the Serbian and Croatian presidents in the last 2 decades have come out and apologized for crimes committed in the names of their respective nationalities in Bosnia. And it seems like people in general are just more careful, more wary of not doing things or not doing anything that could lead to what happened in the 90s repeating itself again. Even though the progress is slow, we can't lose hope. And it seems like people in this region haven't lost hope at all. In fact, they didn't lose hope in the middle of this whole mess. Right when the city under siege for 3.5 years or 4 years, the people did their best to show that they have not lost faith in themselves. So people would, stay out of the line of fire and do what's reasonable, but when they had to go about their normal lives, they would go out in their best clothes. Women would put on lipstick and makeup and their best outfits and go on like they would if this wasn't happening. The reasoning behind this was that they did not want to let these militias strip them of their identity, because that's when the militia would win, is if they lost hope in themselves. It's okay to come across major challenges in life and fail when you face them. There are circumstances we can't control, but it's never okay to lose the will to try to face these challenges. It's easier said than done, but it's doable. And the people of Sarajevo, the people of Yugoslavia have shown that in the face of adversity. And that sort of courage is essential, because it's the only thing that will help us move on to a better world. That was a lot. I hope I was able to do justice to the story of this city. There's definitely a lot more about this that you can learn, and I'll link appropriate sources in the video description. That's it for this one, guys. I'll catch you guys from the next video, probably somewhere in the Balkans.